None of us can know when our life will end. Today we can breathe easy, enjoy a sunny morning, and follow our daily routines as usual. But tomorrow, life can change into something we never imagined. That's essentially what happened to the people in a true story from China in 2018, an event that nearly claimed the lives of over 100 people midair, yet ultimately transformed them into witnesses to one of the greatest miracles in modern aviation history. That morning, veteran pilot Captain Liu Changjian prepared for his duty like any other day. A former Air Force member with extensive flight experience, it also happened to be his only daughter's birthday. Captain Liu had promised her he'd be home that evening to celebrate with the family. Meanwhile, at Chongqing Airport, a light drizzle fell. The crew of Sichuan Airlines Flight 3 U8633 had arrived early for preparations. The flight was bound for Lhasa, the capital of Tibet, with a scheduled departure of 6 a.m. Before takeoff, the crew conducted an extremely detailed routine check, reviewing the flight path and analyzing any potential weather impacts. The flight attendants prepared to serve with efficiency and professionalism. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Before duty, the crew shared a meal together. There was an interesting personal dynamic among the pilots. Captain Liu was known to be less than fond of co-pilot Su's attitude, considering him arrogant, someone who often used his pilot title to attract attention, especially from women. Like anyone else, the crew members had personal lives. Some were in relationships, some married, and some were even quietly pursuing romances with fellow crew members. The airport was bustling with passengers heading to their flights, absorbed in their pre-boarding routines, checking in, dropping bags, passing through security. The flight crew also began boarding the aircraft. None of them had any idea that this day would become one they would never forget. Before departure, the crew conducted another meticulous final check. The flight attendants tidied the cabin, ensured all safety equipment was in place, verified the emergency exits were functional, and double-checked seatbelts. Meanwhile, the pilots and technicians checked the aircraft's condition, cabin pressure systems, fuel levels, and flight weather. After the technician's inspection, Captain Liu signed off, confirming the plane was in perfect working order. Every technical check was done to ensure a safe and smooth journey. Besides Captain Liu, the cockpit crew included First Officer Liang Dong and Second Officer Su Yichen. Inside the cockpit, Captain Liu often ignored or brushed off Su's attempts at conversation. First Officer Liang Peng tried to ease the tension, asking Captain Liu to lighten up, suggesting that Su was actually a good kid and that maybe after this flight, Captain Liu would grow to like him. Before passengers boarded, the crew held a final briefing. Captain Liu gave specific instructions to the cabin crew. The flight was expected to encounter some fairly strong turbulence, so they needed to be prepared and capable of calming passengers if shaking occurred. Passengers then began boarding, greeted by the flight attendants. They found their seats and stowed their luggage with help from the crew. In total, there were 128 people on board, 119 passengers and 9 crew members, 3 pilots and 6 cabin crew, 5 flight attendants, and 1 purser. After the diverse group of passengers, including children, teenagers, adults, the elderly, and foreign tourists, completed check-in and settled in, the aircraft doors were closed. Right on schedule at 6:26 a.m., the plane took off, beginning its journey to Lhasa. Initially, the flight proceeded smoothly toward Tibet, but the calm didn't last. When the plane reached an altitude of 9,200 meters above sea level, strong turbulence began to shake the aircraft. The shaking was enough to make passengers panic. The flight attendants immediately sprang into action, initiating casual conversation and offering reassurances to ease fears, expertly following Captain Liu's earlier instructions. Captain Liu then contacted air traffic control, requesting permission to climb to a higher altitude in hopes of escaping the turbulent air layer. Permission was granted, and the plane ascended to 9,800 meters. The turbulence subsided, and the passengers relaxed. They were allowed to use the lavatories and eat. At this point, Captain Liu engaged the autopilot, letting the automatic systems handle the flight, essentially taking his hands off the wheel. The plane continued its climb until it reached its cruising altitude of 9,800 meters. First Officer Liang, no longer needed in the cockpit, decided to step out and visit the passenger cabin. He walked around, greeting people and checking on their condition. After entering the Tibetan highlands and with the plane stable on autopilot, First Officer Liang took his break in the cabin. On the return journey, he would be the one taking over the primary controls from Captain Liu. In the cockpit, Captain Liu was now alone with co-pilot Su. He used the moment to offer Su some more advice. Captain Liu urged him not to show off his job title or skills so much, and to be a more humble pilot. Having top grades in the academy doesn't guarantee you'll be top-rated in the field, he said. Su, who had initially been arrogant, listened intently. Captain Liu himself had flown this route many times. Combined with his Air Force missions, it amounted to about 100 flights. He had piloted bombers in the military before transitioning to commercial aircraft, a difficult switch where he'd often been scolded by his instructors. In the middle of this conversation between Captain Liu and co-pilot Su, the unimaginable happened. The cockpit windshield in front of Su suddenly cracked. Captain Liu acted instantly. He contacted ATC to report the incident, declaring they would need to make an emergency landing at another airport. ATC responded by advising Captain Liu to descend to 8,400 meters. This drastic drop from 9,800 meters was recommended because flying at high altitude with a cracked windshield was extremely dangerous. But before the descent instruction could be carried out, the cracked windshield suddenly gave way completely. It shattered, blowing out and leaving a massive hole in the front of the cockpit. Blasting wind and extreme temperatures instantly flooded in. Imagine opening a car window at high speed. This was infinitely worse, happening at thousands of meters in the air with the plane traveling over 500 kilometers per hour. In the passenger cabin, First Officer Liang, who was still making his rounds, immediately sensed something was wrong. Passengers began to panic as violent turbulence shook the plane again. The flight attendants instructed everyone to remain calm and fasten their seatbelts. Co-pilot Su, who was seated right beside the window, was instantly sucked outwards. His upper body was violently pulled through the window opening, from his head down to his waist, with only his legs still inside the cockpit, pinned to his seat. He was being battered by the freezing hurricane-force wind. Captain Liu acted on pure instinct. He used his right hand to grab and pull on Su's uniform with all his might. His left hand was still fighting to control the main steering column. The plane immediately tilted and went into an uncontrolled dive as the autopilot disengaged. Captain Liu now had to manually fly the plane while physically holding onto his co-pilot, who was being sucked out, all at a speed exceeding 500 kilometers per hour. The struggle was overwhelming. First Officer Liang rushed toward the cockpit, but got no response when he tried to contact Captain Liu on the intercom. Captain Liu was in a desperate, single-handed battle to save Su. When Liang managed to force the cockpit door open, the high-speed wind blasted into the cabin with immense force. Everything in the cabin went flying. Passenger seats were thrown about. Oxygen masks automatically dropped from the ceiling. For a moment, there was a sensation of zero gravity, sending people and objects floating. One flight attendant was thrown to the floor and knocked unconscious. Another flight attendant immediately commanded passengers to put on their oxygen masks to prevent catastrophe. Meanwhile, commercial air traffic control still could not reach Captain Liu. The controller reported the loss of contact to his superiors. They then contacted military air traffic control, as the stricken Sichuan Airlines flight was heading into their airspace, prompting the military to begin monitoring the situation. Captain Liu fought to regain control. The plane was now in a steep dive, losing altitude at a rate exceeding 3,000 meters per minute due to the loss of cabin pressure. The aircraft would crash if it continued like this. Miraculously, Captain Liu managed to pull the nose up, preventing a deadly plummet. First Officer Liang, with the help of a flight attendant and passengers, struggled against the hurricane-force wind to enter the chaotic cockpit. Once inside, he immediately secured the cockpit door shut. He helped pull co-pilot Su back into his seat, then secured oxygen masks for both Captain Liu and Su. Su's face and body were severely injured. Despite his critical injuries, damage to his eyes and hands, Co-pilot Sue managed to trigger the emergency transponder. The emergency signal from Flight 3U-8633 was immediately received by ATC. They identified Chengdu Shuangliu Airport as the emergency landing site, now 100 kilometers from the nearest navigation station. The military contacted Chengdu's area control to coordinate the emergency landing. They began clearing the airspace and runways. 15 planes waiting for takeoff were grounded due to the situation. Fire trucks, ambulances, and medical teams were scrambled to the runway. The Air Force even canceled training exercises to help monitor Captain Lu's approach. All other aircraft in the area were ordered back to base. Airspace control was temporarily handed over from military to civilian authorities to streamline the emergency landing. With still no radio response, ATC asked other commercial flights in the area to try contacting Captain Lu's plane on the emergency frequency. Perhaps they could get through, but there was still no response. Meanwhile, at Chongqing Airport, First Officer Liang's wife grew frantic after receiving news of a problem on her husband's flight. A sense of dread settled over her. The head flight attendant checked on all her crew. Everyone responded except for attendant number 5, who was found unconscious on the floor. They managed to revive her, and she signaled she was okay. She then found a seat and strapped herself in. Once the crew was accounted for, the head attendant again worked to calm the passengers, instructing them to remain seated, keep their seatbelts fastened, and breathe using the oxygen masks. Because the plane had lost cabin pressure, they needed to descend below 3,000 meters for sufficient oxygen. But they were currently over the Tibetan Plateau, with an average altitude of 4,500 meters. The plane had to first get out of the highlands before it could safely descend. Under normal conditions, reaching Chengdu would take about 30 minutes. Elsewhere, Captain Lu's wife received a call. News about the loss of contact with her husband's flight was already spreading online. She could only surrender to fate, not knowing what would happen next. Soon, an even greater challenge of nature appeared. A massive, menacing black thunderhead, a cumulonimbus cloud, blocked their path. This cloud was extremely dangerous to fly through. They couldn't fly over it without risking oxygen loss, and flying through the storm was also impossible. It was like flying into a giant spinning blender. Captain Lu then began circling the plane before entering the storm. This maneuver made passengers anxious as the aircraft circled over the mountains. They began to fear they would become victims of a crash. One frustrated passenger even tried to rush the cockpit. The head flight attendant and other crew quickly restrained and calmed him, urging everyone to place their full trust in the captain. The head attendant stressed that everyone wanted to survive and that cooperation was the key. At the Civil Aviation Traffic Control Bureau, the controllers began to realize the flight crew was reaching the limit of human endurance. They all waited for a miracle. Captain Lu then made his move, steering the plane into the ferocious storm. It was now 7:24 a.m. They were 160 kilometers from Chengdu Airport, at an altitude of 7,000 meters, traveling at 612 kilometers per hour. It turned out Captain Lu had been waiting for the cumulonimbus cloud to disperse. Now a path to Chengdu had opened. Even so, the plane was incredibly difficult to control, and violent turbulence shook the aircraft. The crew and passengers surrendered to fate, each praying according to their own beliefs. Luggage from the overhead bins began to fall, hitting passengers. Amid the panic, Captain Lu faced another hazard: rain. At 6,700 meters and high speed, the rain didn't feel like liquid. It was like hard pellets of hail. This hail pounded the aircraft and further injured co-pilot Sue through the shattered windshield. As the plane entered the thunderhead, the signal from Flight 3U-8633 was lost again from ATC. Panic spread in the control center. Yet, miraculously, the thick clouds seemed to part, creating a narrow passage for the plane. After breaking through, the plane's signal was detected once more, astonishing everyone monitoring its progress. But Captain Lu faced a new problem. The plane was now flying too low and was heading directly toward the Himalayan mountains. With the unwavering belief that 128 lives were in his hands, Captain Lu manually increased the plane's speed and altitude, barely clearing the mountain peaks. Despite severe turbulence, the plane succeeded in passing the obstacle. The plane was now at 6,000 meters, traveling at 674 kilometers per hour. It was only 65 kilometers from Chengdu. Captain Lu guided the plane toward Chengdu Shuangliu Airport, whose runways were now cleared solely for their emergency landing. The plane began its final descent over Chongzhou. It was heavily overloaded, meaning the landing would be very fast. Emergency landing procedures were initiated. The cabin crew instructed passengers to assume the brace position. As the plane neared the ground, the landing gear was lowered. Captain Lu stomped on the brakes with all his strength, but the excessive speed caused the tires to burst. Smoke and sparks flew from the friction between the wheels and the tarmac. Finally, the three pilots brought the plane to a complete stop on the runway. Everyone on the ground, from emergency crews and medics to journalists, erupted in cheers. After the successful landing, Captain Lu was finally able to respond to ATC. He then made an announcement to the passengers, apologizing for failing to deliver them to Lhasa and thanking them for choosing Sichuan Airlines. The passengers, overcome with emotion and relief, raised their thumbs in unison toward the cockpit as a gesture of profound gratitude. In the cockpit, co-pilot Su thanked Captain Lu. This time, Captain Lu responded warmly, telling Su that he would one day become a great and responsible pilot. The aircraft doors were opened. Passengers disembarked using emergency slides to receive medical assistance. All crew members, including Captain Lu, Liang, and the head flight attendant, bowed deeply to the exiting passengers. This tragedy became a miracle in world aviation history. All crew members received awards and monetary compensation. Captain Lu was honored with the title of Civil Aviation Hero Captain in China, and the rest of the crew received honors as well. The key takeaway from this story is that teamwork is the ultimate key to achieving a common goal, especially in life or death situations. Pilots, flight attendants, ATC, and even passengers, everyone must fulfill their role with responsibility. Even when faced with seemingly impossible odds, effort, duty, and prayer must be combined to avert the worst. And in a quiet little home, a young girl blew out her birthday candles. Her father sat beside her, smiling gently. He had kept his promise. "I'll be home tonight," and Captain Lu truly made it home.